What's up, guys? Welcome back. So I found out our problem here that was not letting us to fetch. So if I refresh and I try to fetch for this URL, we were having a problem where we were not being able to find anything. And if I go over to the code for that, that'll be in single recipe. We were trying to do a query like this, right? And we were looking for the ID. So I was wondering why the heck this wasn't working, and so I was going into the database and I realized, take a look at this. The ID value is actually an object. It's called object ID, and it looks like that. Now notice how name is just a string, but this is an object. And so that's why it wasn't working, because we can't compare against objects here. And I'm not actually sure how to create my object ID. I was looking at the Feathers Mongo thing, and they have this thing called Objectify ID. If I go to it, right here, it basically creates a new object ID. That's something they get from mongodb, and that's how they actually do the query. So unless we wanted to create our own little hook to do this for us, looking in the find, it never actually does that for us. But notice how in get, so if I do a get request, it actually does objectify the ID, but it doesn't do that for find. So find is not working. So the way I'm going to do it is in our hook, what we're going to do is we're actually just going to make owner ID a string. So basically, instead of using the pre-made hook, we're going to make our own hook and make ID a string. Or sorry, not owner ID. We'll get to that problem soon, actually, of messing with the database to make this not an object. But the first thing to fix the problem is we actually don't even need to use a find here, because we're only looking for one object. What we can actually do is do the get, because get works. Instead of doing this request recipe ID, I'll just pass in the ID .props.match.params.recipe, like that. And now in our sagas, we can fix that. And also, I wanted to address this is add recipe here. We're doing fetch recipe done. We don't need that. I don't know why that was there. So we can just remove that. This is good though. Okay, so fetch recipe, I believe it was called. Fetch recent recipe. What was the function called? Request recipe. So listening for request recipe. Actually, were we not listening for it? Or what was calling that? So request recipe. Request recipe was recipe fetch requested. Recipe fetch requested, which then calls this, which calls find recipe. Now instead, what we want to do is we're going to call get recipe. So we're going to create a new function called get recipe. And now we're just going to have a single recipe, so we can actually change our reducer here. And it's actually going to look just like my recipe fetch done, but I'm just going to return the payload there, because it's no longer going to be an array. Okay. And then our API is very easy to change. We copy find recipe, because create recipe is basically the same thing. Create recipe, sorry, not create, get recipe, and then you just do a get there. And now we're returning an object, so we should do an object like that. So now if we refresh, oops, let's see what happens. So return undefined to ignore. So are we getting undefined from this? Oh no, because we don't have to do .data anymore, right? Yeah. Fetch recent recipes is fine. Call fetch recipe, recipe.data. Now it's just the recipe. And there we go. So the recipe showed up there. Was there supposed to be an image here? I forget if the image is supposed to show up. Let's go to React. Oh, it probably is. Probably the same problem I had before. So single recipe view, and we just do lowercase, lowercase. Now let that refresh. And there we go. So our recipe now renders here. So what I was talking about earlier though, about fixing this problem, that's going to come up when we actually, for example, log in. So if I log in, and oh, I guess we should address this problem first. When I log in, notice how we're not like adding the user here. That's a very easy change. If we go to our user saga, request auth, we just need to call request auth. Request auth. So after we log in, try login, login succeeded, then we're going to yield put request auth. And request auth, what that will do is that will just should there be a space between put? Nope. Oh, that's a function. What request auth is going to do there is it's just going to then go in, get the token, verify the token, and get the user that we want. So now if I log in, now we see Bob there. Cool. So now when I click on Bob, I should see all my profile recipes, which we don't. So if I go into my recipes, notice how what we would like to do is something like this. Oops. So do a query. So our syntax is right here. So this page, we want to get all the recipes that we made. So the syntax is right for this, but because the owner ID is an object, we won't actually find any. So when I refresh the page here, no record found for ID object. Not sure what the heck happened there. Start props.user underscore ID object. Request my recipe. Console.log this.props.user. But I was not expecting this to happen, so I'm not sure what just occurred. Let's console log the user. The user ID should just be a string, which it is. And then it looks like it's going to recipes and it's passing an object in. So let's see what requests my recipe is doing, because this looks correct. So we can close some of this stuff too. So we don't need home, we don't need recipe. So working with my recipes, which has to do with this saga here. So fetch my recipes. So call my recipes. Right here, looks like it's just passing in find recipes here. And that's just calling the API here. Let's console.log payload, I guess. So for some reason the payload looks like it's an object, which it should be. Payload. So this function should be called on this page. So I'm surprised that it's not. Okay, it's not being called. Get recipe, find recipe, saga. So okay, fetch my recipe fetch requested. So in this thing, we're calling the action request my recipe. And if I go to actions here, request my recipe gets recipe fetch requested. So both of these are going to the same action, which is wrong. This one should be my recipe fetch requested. There we go. So our action was just going to the wrong place. Now, still getting an error? Payload of undefined. Okay. So the action being passed in is undefined. So I assume that'd be saga. My recipe fetch requested call. I'm assuming this is undefined and that's what they're talking about. So I have no idea actually what the heck is going on all of a sudden. So we're calling this function request my recipe, which is an action here. Request my recipe, which should trigger the my recipe fetch requested. My recipe fetch requested, which is this guy, which should then call this and pass it as a parameter. But obviously it's not. So what we'll do is here instead, oh haha, we had the Feathers app there, and the Feathers app should not have been there. Okay, some silly problems there. Alright. That looks good. We even add authorization. Query owner ID is equal to this string. Okay, so it's working as expected now, and we're just not getting anything here. My recipes.map is not a function, so the reducer for my recipes should return this. My recipe fetch done is what we should call here, my recipe fetch done. So my recipes, I have no idea what my recipes is equal to. So let's just go down the tree. So this is going to be profile authenticated connect. So we see the user here. We should see my recipes. Oh, my recipes.data. There we are. And are we printing it? No, we're not. So let's console.log my recipes here, so we can see what's returned from our query. And what we should expect is an empty array, because like how I was saying earlier, the object, we're passing in a string to check, and the other thing is an object. So we see 0 there. Cool. Now that is working. So what we're going to do is we're going to do fix stuff on the database side. So get out of here. So right now, if I come into the database and I look at the, not the hooks, but the, I think it was under services, recipes, hooks, this associate current user. This is not doing what we want it to. So now what we're going to do is we can actually get out of here, so we move that hook. Instead, we're going to add our own hook. So add owner ID. This will be a before hook. This will be for recipes and only when we create. So now our hook here, add owner ID. The first thing I'm going to do is print out the object just so we can see what it looks like. So hook.params.user should print out the user. So I can start up the server now, and then I can come over here and I can add a recipe, and then we can see what's getting printed. Okay, and looks like ID might be a string. So let's console log just the ID and make sure that is a string, and if it is, we can add it directly. So let's add another recipe. And it looks like a string to me. So what I can do now is I can say hook.data.ownerID is equal to hook.params.user._ID. And I'll just add it in. So now we can refresh. So now when I add this recipe, it should have a string for the owner ID. So you should see me in profile page. Okay, now if I come over here, and we do not see it. So what I'll do is I'll come over here to the database, and db.recipes.find1, and we need to use upgraded menu monkey. So we basically just need to switch to the database first. Now I can do, like, for example, find one. Let's do find all, I believe. Nope. Is it just all? Nope. I forget what the command is. Here we go. We want to just find. Oh wow, this is a lot of junk. So this would be the last one that's added, I believe. And looks like it's not a string. So what I'll do is we can just force it into a string like this. It looked like a string when we console logged it. So now when I add a recipe, definitely see me. I spelled that wrong. Okay, submit. And cool. Now we see it here. So notice how we just had to force making this into a string. So now we can remove that. And now our server is good. It adds the ID just as a string. So now we can just let that run forever. We don't need this anymore. So now we can do what we were doing right here, where we were basically checking the user ID. If you're familiar with Feathers and MongoDB and you know how to do this the correct way, please let me know if you know how to make a query, because really what we'd like to do is something like this, new object ID, and not keep it as a string in the database. But I'm not sure how to do this, pass that in a URL, pass an object like that, or tell Feathers to do that. So if you do know how to do that, please let me know in the comments below, because I would love to know. But for now, we'll do it like this. It works, and it's a decent approach. Okay, so that's it for this video. We now can see our recipes in the profile page. These recipes we won't be able to see, the ones we made before, but all new recipes made from now on, you should be able to see in your profile page. And if we click on them, we should be able to see them here no matter what, because we use the get command. Okay, so now we have all that. And that's it for this video, and I'll see you guys in the next one.